Hi, my name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, and this clip is part of my series analyzing the Essential Bukowski, edited by Abel DeBrito. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as it was streamed on Twitch, with all the imperfections and tangents of a live stream. If you want to learn more or catch me live, make sure to check out the description, otherwise enjoy the incredible work of Charles Bukowski. Here it is. We're eating beans with garlic, which really doesn't sound very Bukowski, just based on the title. But of course it is, as you can see. So beans and garlic we will read. Getting some water here. The process: a couple reads, then some notes, then some analysis, then some thoughts, then some rambling, then some drawing, and then by the end of it we should have a decent understanding of what's going on in the poem. So, Beans and Garlic by Charles Bukowski. This is important enough to get your feelings down. It is better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. It is the very little we can do. This small bravery of knowledge. There is, of course, madness and terror too in knowing that some part of you, wound up like a clock, can never be wound again once it stops. But now there's a ticking under your shirt, and you whirl the beans with a spoon. One love dead, one love departed, another love. Ah, as many loves as beans. Yes, count them now. Sad, sad. Your feelings boiling over flame. Get this down. So, well, I'll wait a second and read it again. But this idea of get this down, I really like that. I relate to that. I kind of felt what this poem, some of what this poem is saying yesterday when I was eating dinner. There was something I had to get down, and it was related to food. In terms of getting down on a page, right? Which sometimes we're a poet, we see something that inspires us, we see something that we really want, that gives us an idea, and there's this unfortunate reality where you have to write it down really quickly, or else you'll probably forget it, because poetry is so specific and in the moment that I think that's a fairly common experience. So when Bukowski says, get this down, I relate to that one for sure. But we're going to read the poem again, and then dig into some more analysis about beans and garlic, which is a fairly, admittedly kind of simple poem. Straightforward. Mundane for Bukowski, perhaps. He loves the mundane, but mundane in a different way. Here's Beans and Garlic, again. This is important enough to get your feelings down. It is better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. It is the little we can do, this small bravery of knowledge, and there is, of course, madness and terror too in knowing that some part of you, wound up like a clock, can never be wound again once it stops. But now there's a ticking under your shirt, and you whirl the beans with a spoon. One love dead, one love departed, another love. Ah, as many loves as beans. Yes, count them now. Sad, sad, your feelings boiling over flame. Get this down. Yeah, the title and frame. That's helpful. I like that the whole poem fits on the screen. So, we are going to start digging into this poem now. And there are a few things that stick out to me. There are actually a lot of things that stick out to me. Then we're going to go through. We're going to go through the many sticking outing things in this poem. This is important enough to get your feelings down. It is better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. So he talks about this, and I think it's going to be important to ask what this is. Bukowski does this sometimes. I think we've seen this before in his poetry, where he will talk about something, this or it or that, and he won't necessarily say what it is, but he will point to it a bunch throughout a poem. And it's interesting because it feels like usually, like, this isn't entirely what the poem is about, but it's definitely an important thing, where sometimes I feel like I see people write poems about an unmentioned idea, and they'll say this or that, or they'll speak to it, and then kind of it'll be the sole focus of the work. But I think Bukowski definitely kind of plays with that. Ella, Jade, E.G., hello, Ginny, welcome. How are you? We are reading a poem called Beans with Garlic by Charles Bukowski here on stream. And currently talking about this. What is this? This is important enough. Bukowski begins the poem with this line, and I think it's going to take some time to pinpoint what this is referring to, but that's what we are moving toward. It is the little we can do, this small bravery of knowledge. And there is, of course, madness and terror too, in knowing that some part of you wound up like a clock can never be wound again once it stops. So it is the little we can do. Right? Bukowski refers to this and then it. It is the little we can do. And Bukowski also kind of does this. He'll tell you usually what it is. But it tends to be more than what he's saying. It is the little we can do, this small bravery of knowledge. And there is, of course, madness and terror, too, in knowing. You have this repeating theme, knowledge, that he's speaking to. That some part of you wound up like a clock can never be wound again once it stops. And I think this knowledge has something to do with, like, the little we can do. The knowledge of things, life, the way things unfold, the knowledge of death as well that he mentions in the idea of the clock stopping. Of course, the idea of death and that knowledge is, I would say, deeply related to the idea of what we can do in life, because this is a great limiter, right? Death is like the ultimate limit that we have on life, where we have all these things we can do, all these different actions, all these different exciting things, but at the end of the day, our knowledge, our existence, even our madness, even our terror, even these negative things are all limited by the unwinding of this clock. But now, there's a ticking under your shirt, and you whirl the beans with a spoon, one love dead. One love departed, another love, as many loves as beans. Yes, count them now, sad, sad, your feelings boiling over a flame. Get this down. This makes me think of a few things, actually. So, your feelings boiling over a flame. And he's seeing sort of his love, right, in the pot of beans in this poem. And seeing these lovers seeing this death, seeing this loss, right? And then, of course, also he talks about loss earlier in the poem. And this feels relatable in a way to me, where when you experience these very deep, these very heavy emotions, you get to this point where it takes over, right? Everything is just consumed by these emotions, these ideas of loss, these ideas of pain, and you see it in everything you do. And I do feel like this is kind of what Bukowski is feeling, right? And I also think this because he says this is important enough to get your feelings down, get this down. And this can also make it very difficult to get your feelings down, being in these spaces, these head spaces of pain, of suffering, of loss. So when you do find something, some relation, some poetic connection to get these feelings down, it is so crucial to find that and actually make use of it, right? It is better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. This is important enough to get your feelings down. It is better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. It is the little we can do. So he finds this thought in the midst of cooking beans with garlic. It is the little we can do, and this is important. And you have to get it down. And I sort of started at least a few minutes ago by talking about this, that this feeling of finding something, of noticing something about life in the mundane, and in while cooking beans with garlic, right? While cooking something simple, and then connecting, right? He's cooking beans and thinking about that life is this little bit that we can do, even against the terror of knowing that we will die. Which is dark, right? But there's also some amount of, like, catharsis there, I think. Some amount of release. There's a ticking under your shirt, and you whirl the beans with a spoon. I like this line as well. Because, interestingly, these two metaphors that he uses, the clock and the pot of beans, they have a similar feeling, right? The spoon stirs around and around and around, just as the clock turns continually, time turning. And and I do think he intends a connection here. I think part of that is your feelings boiling over a flame, because here, with this stirring, with this process, with this change, he is changing, he is processing, he is growing, he is sort of simmering over these emotions. Quite literally, he says your feelings boiling over a flame, right? And then simultaneously, he has this clock ticking, the life moving forward, and that impending nature. I think these are very connected, because he also back to the little we can do. Basically, the connection that I'm seeing here is that we spend our lives trying to get over the emotions, the pain, move forward, keep the clock ticking. Right. Keep stirring the beans, the emotions, having them simmer. And I think that is to say that we sort of need to do this, right? He does say this is important enough to get this down. This connection is important to Bukowski. And these spinnings, the turning of the emotions, the processing, we need to continually have emotions and sort of cook them down, and then find new emotions and cook them down. This cycle of adversity is what I feel he refers to here in the poem, right? And it's interesting. Nico. Welcome, Nico. How are you? We're reading Bukowski. It's called Beans and Garlic. And I've sort of been good at putting together connections for maybe the last 15 minutes about this poem. I haven't really gotten anywhere, I would say. I'm sort of saying words and writing things, but it's not quite there. I'm just talking about death mostly. But I'll read it again, since you've just joined. Beans with garlic. This is important enough to get your feelings down. It is better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. It is the little we can do, this small bravery of knowledge, and there is of course madness and terror too in knowing that some part of you wound up like a clock can never be wound again once it stops. But now there's a ticking under your shirt, and you whirl the beans with a spoon, one love dead, one love departed, another love. Ah, as many loves as beans. Yes, count them now. Sad, sad, your feelings boiling over a flame. Get this down. So why does he talk about get this down? Why is it important? Why do we need to get this down? Why do we need to write it? Because he makes this a very crucial part of the poem, right? Why is it? And I think this is because Bukowski's processing of life is through poetry, right? Process life through poetry. I think this is how he operates. I think as he speaks in interviews in the previous poems, we've sort of seen this. Ah, yes, processing life through poetry. Yes. So this is what he does, right? And as the pain comes, as the pain goes, he uses the poetry as a way to deal with those feelings, describe them, get through them. And there are like these two thoughts in my head that I'm trying to get together about this poem, because there's this broader idea that Bukowski talks about in this poem about life and death, right? And that there's a ticking under your shirt right now, and you are alive. And life is moving forward, and you don't really need to worry about this. Well, you do. But we do. There's madness. There's terror. And then there's this other idea about the emotion that we feel in life, and the loss, and the lovers, and stirring the beans is also very much connected here. And then the idea of writing, right, and processing. And dealing with the passage of time. And these are, that's what I think this poem is about. It's about how we cope with the passage of time, like on a fundamental level. And he writes about the fear of death more so than death itself, and the way that life passes and we move toward death. He's not so much one to... He says that he's not afraid of death in interviews, which maybe is true, maybe it's not. I don't think you can trust most things out of Charles Bukowski's mouth. But basically, we have life. Go down here. And life moves forward like the ticking of a clock, right? Until it stops. And then we're dead. This is what he describes. And as we go along ticking, we whirl the beans with a spoon, right? And I think this is to say that as we go along life, things get mixed up, things get confusing, emotions rise and fall, you know, they boil up, they boil over, they come back down. This is life, just like stirring beans, right? So sort of a sine wave. And, you know, this could be more compact or whatever. Right. This is life. The stirring of beans. And as these things happen, as life changes, as it goes around and around and around, and we move forward, I think Bukowski says that we need to find a way to cope with this. He needs to get this down. Why does he need to get this down in this moment as he's thinking about death and he's thinking about stirring beans? I think it's because poetry is the way that he copes with these things. The lovers dying, the mere fact that he cycles through lovers quickly, the pain, the fear of death, the madness, the terror, right? This is only managed through... Let me, sorry, it's getting a little tilted. This is only managed, for him at least, through poetry and maybe knowing Charles Bukowski drinking as well. But this is how he survives. This is how he operates. And I also want to just point out another line that I do think relates here. It's better than shaving. I find this extremely intentional at the start of the poem. Shaving is a way to cope with the passage of time, in a sense, in that the hair grows, you shave it, and you return to that baseline. You return to that nice, clean feeling. Like, it feels good to shave. And it is, in a sense, a way to cope with, like, an expression of time passing. Quite literally, like, dealing with the hair growing and then getting rid of it, right? And also, cooking beans with garlic goes into this camp, and I think essentially this is also talking about the passage of time, cooking, keeping oneself alive, right? We cook so we can eat, so we can be nourished, so we can, like, move on to the next day. And in that regard, he basically says here, there are many ways we cope with life. Some are simple. Cope with life, cope with time. Some are simple. We eat, we shave. These little things. And then some are more impactful and more necessary. Well, those are necessary, but they're more powerful for us in these moments, especially in difficult moments. And I think this is why Bukowski, amongst the process of cooking, when he has this realization, these little things that help us survive, I think that's where the connection of the poetry comes in. Because poetry is similarly for him one of these little things, maybe a big thing for him, that quite literally keeps him alive. I think that's the point. That feels like the point of the poem, right? Any other thoughts out there? This is important enough to get your feelings down. I also like this, get your feelings down, because there's sort of a double meaning that I notice, in that we of course talk about getting our feelings down as poets, as in writing, but also when we have feelings that are sort of excited or elevated and that kind of thing. Yeah, regulating emotion, that they come up and then we find ways to get the feelings down and calm them. So it's not just think of writing, but it's also regulation. I mean, poetry is a great way to regulate emotion. Regulate sometimes, yeah. Sometimes poetry sends us further spiraling, which is a dangerous thing. I don't think I recommend poetry as like a sole coping mechanism against the world. But, you know, it is helpful. You're going to lurk and prepare your breakfast. Enjoy your breakfast preparation, Nico. So then, it is the little we can do. An expression of this. Fighting against that constant forward motion, that suffering. This small bravery of knowledge. And there is, of course, madness and terror, too, in knowing that some part of you wound up like a clock can never be wound again once it stops. So, bravery and knowledge. That there is in some way something very difficult that we are, bravely pushing against through knowledge. This small bravery of knowledge. I mean, it's small, but there is something that threatens us that we have to be brave against. And I think this is once again like death, and that the bravery of knowledge is that it's sort of imminent, right? Once one understands the reality of death, it's there, it haunts you, the ticking, you notice it, right, until it's over. And so the bravery and knowledge, perhaps, is to say that I'm going to keep going, right? I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing these things. I'm going to keep the pot stirring. And I will feel madness and terror. I am going to suffer in life. I'm going to suffer in life. And I'm going to suffer over the fact that there is death. And yet I will keep going. And why is that? Following on X, I drop you a follow back. Maybe. I mean, I don't open my socials on stream. That's all. So, madness and terror in knowing. So there is this suffering, this continued pain, whatever, right? And yeah, we cope with it through poetry. We cope with madness through poetry in the same way we cope with hunger through food, in the same way that we cope with hair growing on our face through shaving. And I love how Bukowski does this, right? Because he takes extraordinarily mundane things, cooking beans with garlic, and he is able to connect them to these broader ideas. And he mentions this actually specifically in other poems, The State of World Affairs from a Third Floor Window, where he talks about life is fundamentally kind of mundane and boring, and there's suffering, and like nothing really happens. And so he has to create poetry in the world around him. He has to get these things down. He has to express such that there is a sort of barrier, a way to cope with that. Poetry is a cope. It really is. Poetry is a way to cope with the world. Most things are. Most things are just ways to cope with what's going on. Of course, poetry also connects us with the people, connects us to people, gives us community. gives us joy, gives fulfillment. But those are probably, at least from this perspective, those are all just ways to think about and deal with impending death. in knowing that some part of you is wound up like a clock, can never be wound again once it stops. But now there's a ticking under your shirt. And I love this line. You'll notice I say this a lot about Bukowski, that I really like his lines. I really like Bukowski. I'm a fan of him. I think his work is pretty brilliant. I hated him at first. I didn't like Bukowski when I first opened him. I think if you go back to the very start of the videos on the Bukowski series, I say this. I'm like, I don't like this guy, but I'm going to read him. And now I love him. He's my boy. And so then he goes to, there's a ticking under your shirt. We feel it, it continues, all this kind of stuff, right? And you whirl the beans with a spoon, you keep going, you keep stirring, one love dead, one love departed, another love. The pain, the stirring, the continuation, the coping. Ah, as many loves as beans. And I think this is important because it says that he's talking about more than just love here, because he probably hasn't literally had as many loves as he has had beans, or has beans in the pot. I mean, he has lots of lovers in his life, but I do think this refers more broadly to the things we find and do, and like passion, let's say poetry, and just joy, that we find and that we lose. Ella Jade, I do my own channel art, so I don't need anything. Yes, count them now. Sad, sad. Right. And it is sad when we look back and look at all of this. You know, we're all somewhere, we are all somewhere along this line, this graph. I love graphs. We're all somewhere here. And looking back can often be just quite sad in general, because we remember these lows and the things we lost, and of course that those things were once highs, and it reminds us of where we are in life, that we're on this sort of continuing path of stirring beans. And it just makes it very evident how sad it all is, and how much time has passed, right? Your feelings boiling over a flame. Get this down. And of course, like another double meaning of the getting down, I would say, not just the emotions, not just the writing, but also, I guess that makes it a triple meaning of getting like the boil to go down, because it'll boil over, right? So to lower like the boil, which is super cool. The way this happens, the way it all connects, I think it's super cool. If I were to critique this poem, because this is something I recommend, critiquing everything. What would I say? How would I critique this? It's always difficult to critique things you like. I say this every time I try to critique Bukowski on stream, because he's really good. But it's important to try to find things we would improve or do differently. When I say, like, I would do something differently, is generally critique. Hi, a potato bun. How are you doing today? Welcome in. We're doing Bukowski right now, and then on to Poets of Twitch. So if I were to critique this, right? This is important enough to get your feelings down. It's better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. It is the little we can do, the small bravery of knowledge. And there is coarse madness and terror too in knowing that some part of you wound up like a clock can never be wound again once it stops. But now There's a ticking under your shirt, and you whirl the beans with a spoon. One love dead, one love departed, another love. Ah, as many loves as beans. Yes, count them now. Sad, sad. Your feelings boiling over flame. You get this down. So admittedly, I don't find these 3 lines entirely useful. I do think everything is pretty fundamentally expressed without these 3 lines. Ah, as many loves as beans. Yes, count them now. Sad, sad. Like, obviously there's this interpretation of, like, looking back on life and that, you know, the beans refer to probably more than just people. When he says, one love dead, one love departed, another love. But I guess that does connect loves to beans. Maybe it's just the counting part that I don't like. Just these 2 lines. I don't find these particularly, like, efficient as a piece of poetry. So I guess that's like a first piece of critique on the point of this. I'm not going to critique his broader ideas because that's not what I do. It's not how I believe critique is. But I think from a perspective of expression, you know, the counting, the sad, it feels reiterative in a way that doesn't help, maybe. But I'm going to take a quick break and go to the bathroom. And then I'll come right back. And maybe during that time I'll think a little bit about critique. Bukowski, yuck. Well, he is sort of yuck because he's a generally pretty bad person, right? But I think his poetry is amazing. Bukowski isn't your jam. So it's funny, a potato bun. At the start of this book, when I was here, 16 poems ago, I said the same thing. I said I don't like Bukowski. I think if you go back to, like, my very first few videos of this, definitely the first one, I'd probably say it. Like, Bukowski was not my jam before either. And after reading, you know, quite a few of his poems so far, I think I've generally changed to really, 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 really loving Bukowski. So maybe old grumpy man poetry is just an acquired taste. But to me, I find that enough time and attention with any poet, with any work, is going to take it from that point of not my jam to at least tolerable and enjoyable, even, perhaps. But that's just my take, because it lets me justify the importance of analysis as an art, because that's what I do all the time. But I'm going to take a quick break. Don't watch these ads. I return. I'm still Ginny, still known as 2/3 Lotus. And we're returning to some Charles Bukowski. I'm critiquing him because I think we should critique everything that we read, at least in some capacity. And on the break, I did not think any more about how I would critique him because I say such things and then I don't think. Because my head is empty. But fundamentally, we said Bukowski is writing a poem about the passage of time, the kind of up and down motions of pain and life and experience, and finding ways to cope with it, from the mundane to the more conceptual, the more emotional, right? This is the fundamental goal of the poem. And I do think the things that he expressed basically are all of the things kind of required, right? I think if you want to talk about the fear of death, you need to outline sort of death and the process and why that is scary, right? And I think he does that with the watch part and then Jin. If you were to have background music, what type of music would I play? Hard question, because I have such a broad taste. I think I would go classical, but maybe like string quartet, honestly. Like, I'm not big on piano. I mean, I love piano. No, like a classical string quartet. That's probably my poetry vibe, if I had to say. That's what I would play. Classical string quartet lo-fi. You can just find string quartet music. There's so much of it. I would listen to minimalism. I would listen to Kronos Quartet plays Philip Glass string quartets 2, 3, 5, and 6. I believe those are the quartets on that album. It has a hand on it. It's one of my favorite classical albums ever. It has Company, Buxok, I think that's how you say it, Mishima, and another one, I think. Maybe it just has 3. Company. Not sure. Anyway. Critique. So, we want to talk about life, death, fear, the moving forward of things. So we need at least something to describe the way that things move forward and the way we deal with life. We need at least something to talk about death and why we should fear it. And then also, since he's talking about coping with that forward spiral of life, you need something to do with that. Like, I think these are the 3 big elements of the poem, right? The idea of the shaving, the cooking, and the writing as the coping, the watch and the death, or the clock and the death, and then also the spoon and the beans and the lovers as like this representation of suffering. So in terms of like being distilled down, he does an excellent job, because Bukowski does a good job of taking these sort of things and getting them into a very small space. Which, you know, I think the easiest way to critique, if you're looking to critique something, is going to be a negative critique. And negative as opposed to additive, where I don't like to tell people to add things unless I know exactly, according to them, like their goal with the poem, which I normally don't want to know. But I can come to an understanding of what I think someone is saying and then say, well, this doesn't contribute. And basically the issue is that Bukowski doesn't give you a lot to cut, in that most of the lines are usually fairly important, right? So, like, "Ah, as many loves as beans," I think really is crucial for saying that beans are a reference to suffering and the things he loses in life. And honestly, like, the sad, I think is, well, he says one dead, one departed. So I think these three lines connect back to the idea of death and the clock in a fairly straightforward manner. Which makes yes count them now. Sad. I mean, it's this idea of him ruminating over the past, but I do think sort of the scene of him staring into the beans, stirring them, is enough, and that maybe that means those two lines aren't entirely useful, right? And then this is important to not get this down. I think these as bookends are important to show that this poem is more broadly about the idea of coping and poetry and the way we deal with life. Without, let's say, both the start and the end, it might be a little less evident to get your feelings down. It is better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. And better than shaving, Bukowski talks about shaving, and he talks about it as like a very like wonderful thing in his poems. So I would never like critique a Bukowski poem for saying that, because that's very him, right? Hi, Stylish Fail, welcome. I'm trying to critique Bukowski, and all I can do to this poem is say, take out two lines. This is beans and garlic. And, like, it is the little we can do. And this line is pretty crucial because it connects the idea of those little things we can do, the beans, or makes them shows that they are the ways that we combat the impending nature of death, right? Without "it is the little we can do," I think the connection gets lost between the beans and the shaving and the poetry as a way to cope, right? This small bravery of knowledge, and there is of course madness and terror too, in knowing that some part of you, wound up like a clock, can never be wound again. Like, I guess I'm wondering about these three lines and whether they're actually useful in this poem. This small bravery of knowledge, right? Saying that, like, the things we do to cope are brave because we are fighting something impossible. There is madness and terror. There is something exceedingly powerful, impossibly powerful to combat. And that's terrifying. That's maddening. And we do it. And we continue, right? And this probably gives context to, like, why this is important. I admittedly don't like, let's say, when a poem just says, this thing is important, and I'm not really going to tell you why something is important. Because, I mean, that goes back to a fairly fundamental writing rule that I'm sure a lot of us have heard if we're writers. If not, that's cool too. We learn. Show, don't tell, right? Show, don't tell. And we do indeed do some telling in poetry a lot of the time. Because if we had things be entirely metaphorical, we would struggle. We do need to offer clarity sometimes. But show don't tell really says, instead of telling the reader that something is important, we should show them. And I do think this shows that it is important. But then it makes me wonder, like, this is important enough to get your feelings down? Does that then matter? But I think it does, because that's also a thought inside of Bukowski's head, right? Like, this is sort of a thought. This is important enough, get this down. Because this is that thought of, like, write these connections, sort of listen and actually turn it into work. And without these, while they do sort of say this is important, they also give insight into his thought, right? Probably gonna listen to this hour-long quartet in full without Jin's analysis in the forefront. Good choice. Good choice. Are you listening to the Chronos album? Or are you listening to something else? Also, there were other things. Hanging out while I get stuff done. It's good to get stuff done. You're doing knitting, Stylish Fail. What are you knitting? That sounds lovely. Oh, I'm so excited for you, Nico. That album is magical. You should just definitely just don't listen to me and listen to that. It's a banger. And it's 3 or 4 different pieces within the album. Reheating my leftovers, clearing my sink, tracing blood sugar, all good things. Journaling, busy. Yeah. I'm doing the tension square for Nico's project. I don't know what Nico's project is, but that sounds cool. I don't know what's a tension square. Is it a I mean, I presume it's a square, right? A knitted journal cover. Oh, that's so cute. I love that. So then these lines are important too, and those lines are important. And knowing that some part of you wound up like a clock can never be wound again once it stops. And I think the clock is important. The circular motion with the circular motion of the beans, this gives the connection to the reader. That's one of the first things I noticed, which makes me think I wouldn't want to critique that away. Ticking under your shirt, and there's a whirl of the beans with a spoon. One love dead, one love departed, another love. Ah, as many loves as beans. I like the ah. The ah seems to contribute to the idea of the poem too, because this is him thinking, ruminating, contemplating, and everything is sort of an expression of Bukowski's inner thought in this moment looking at the beans. So when he says like, ah, it feels like a sort of moment of realization within this poem that is a broader moment of realization. So I like that, you know? Yes, count them now. Sad, sad. Which maybe does make the sad more reasonable if we look at it as him ruminating and thinking. But your feelings boiling over flame. Get this down. Like, I feel like oftentimes with poetry that is as alive as Bukowski's, I'm always able to just continue doing analysis until I analyze away my critique, which is maybe over-analysis, but I don't think that exists. I think over-analysis is the best kind of analysis, and I mean that seriously, which makes it, like, kind of unfortunate, because I want to critique Bukowski, but I also, like Bukowski is someone who I would love to be able to write like. Of course, I don't want to write the same as Bukowski, because then it's not my work, but not my style. But he's really impressive. I like his poetry. You do a set number of rows and then see how long your work is. And then you know if you have the right size of needle. Interesting. I can take weeks in finishing a poem. Yes, I got 15-minute bangers. But I can do thoughtful poems in weeks. Yeah, taking time with poems is good. I don't think Bukowski took time with this poem. Maybe he did. Like obviously he's in the midst of the beans. I kind of think of him like standing over the beans, and then it comes to him, and then he like runs over and grabs something to write on. But I wonder if this poem came out, or if ideas came out and then it took weeks to turn into something, right? I don't know his process. I tend to be a not like weeks kind of person, but I like to write in one go. Say this is the poem, it's done. Regardless, beans with garlic. I'm going to read it again. Unless anyone has thoughts. Knitting is a very slow and steady kind of thing, for me especially. I'm not fast. Poetry for me is I would say a sort of explosive type of thing, where, sometimes thoughts sit and ruminate for quite a time, but as soon as the thought finally comes down in the right place, the entire poem goes. For example, I had a specific phrase in mind that I'd been wanting to write for a long time. Surface tension. It's taken me 2 months to write this. And then I was writing a poem for my girlfriend last night, because I try to write poems about her to prove that I like her to myself. and I had this thought, surface tension, it makes sense, and I just, boom, poem, and then it was done, right? So, like, maybe that poem took 2 months. Like, it's weird because that idea existed before she did in my life. I guess it was 3. I had that idea 3 months ago. Dude, time is messed up. Sweet. It's just writing. I don't know. Anyway. Beans with Garlic by Charles Bukowski. This is important enough to get your feelings down. It is better than shaving or cooking beans with garlic. It is the little we can do. This small bravery of knowledge, and there's of course madness and terror too in knowing that some part of you, wound up like a clock, can never be wound again once it stops. But now there's a ticking under your shirt, and you whirl the beans with a spoon. One love dead, one love departed, another love. Ah, as many loves as beans. Yes, count them now. Sad. Sad. Your feelings boiling over flame. Get this down. Beans with Garlic by Charles Bukowski. What a lovely work. I can't with this guy. I like his poetry too much. You want to bring her a gift? Give her the Essential Bukowski. It's the perfect gift for any lover, because it's about an old man lamenting his lovers most of the time. Don't do that. That's not my advice. Thanks for listening to me and my thoughts on Bukowski. Make sure to check out the rest of the series if you enjoyed, and follow or stop by Twitch if you want to see more. See you there.